Check out that Soul Train line now. The Soul Train gang to the music of earth, wind, and fire, and mighty, mighty.
That's a clip from the groundbreaking television phenomenon, Soul Train. That is great. Get it, Lola, get it. Now, you know that show was meant to be the black answer to American Bandstand, but it ended up being so much more.
Here to discuss his new book about the seminal show, The Hippest Trip in America, is author and cultural critic Nelson George.
What's going on, folks? How are you?
Hey,
Hi,
welcome.
Nelson.
Nice to be here.
So you've written more than 30 books.
Wow. Is it 30?
Yeah, it
It's
is.
a lot. I
lost
don't really
count,
count.
right?
I don't really count.
All right, well, you have.
Okay, thank you for counting for me.
But what made you decide that you wanted to focus on Soul Train this time around?
Well, you know, it's a weird story. A few years ago, I got a phone call. I was walking down DeKalb Avenue in Brooklyn. It was Don Cornelius. Wow. And
He called you?
He was talking about doing his own book. And I was busy doing a bunch of other stuff. I couldn't do it. And he said, well, I assumed he was going to do his own book. It didn't happen. He did do a documentary with VH1.
That is true.
Called The Hippest Trip in America,
He
like my
did.
book. But he never did his own book. So after his passing, I was approached about doing it. I felt like this was something that needed to be done. And there's a lot of great stories to be told. Particularly, I thought of the dancers. Because, I mean, everyone knows all the stars who played on that show. But I felt like the dancers were the stars.
Wow.
The Demita Jo Freeman, to Tyrone Proctor's, the Rosie Perez's, the Jody Watley's, the Jeff Daniels. They were what you watch week after week. People followed their dance steps. People followed their clothes.
Yes.
I mean, it was an evolution not just of a culture, but it was style as well as dance.
Now, who was the Asian lady with the long hair?
Her name is Cheryl Song.
Okay.
And she lives in L.A. still.
Okay.
And
She's still alive.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, so what was her story?
She was a girl from an Asian family that moved into a black neighborhood. She got very attracted to the dance style. I forgot exactly how she ended up auditioning for the show, but when she got on there, she became one of the most identifiable dancers in the history of the show. She was the Asian girl with the long hair.
Yes.
And so she had a very, very powerful impact. She gave the sense of multiculturalism, which was very unusual. You know, it was black and white then. But Soul Train, there were white dancers on Soul Train. Not a lot, but there were a few in there.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a few sprinkled in. So what went into the research and putting this book together, with a lot of interviews, archival footage, what?
Well, I mean, I had the luck that they did that documentary. So I had a foundation of people. But, Rosie Perez, I talked to Jody Watley, talked to Marco de Santiago, who's one of the long-standing dancers there, Tyrone Proctor, one of the people who helped make whack dancing popular. God, so many other people. Another person I should mention is Clarence Avant. A lot of people don't really know his name. He's one of the underground godfathers of black music and entertainment, believe me. He was there with Don in the very beginning. He's the one who negotiated Don's sale of the property later. And he was an advisor to everyone who was around the music business in the 80s and 90s.
I know
Clarence was the man.
His daughter is married to the head of Netflix.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Wow.
He's a huge player in the Democratic political world. Yes.
He's a big Clinton guy, big Jesse guy, big Obama person.
I know.
And in fact, if you remember that film, Looking for Sugar Man?
Yes.
He's prominently featured in that as well.
You are right about that.
So Clarence was crucial because he had a list of from 1971 to like 1993, of every Soul Train show and everybody who was on that show. Can you imagine? Like I was going through, episode 43 had James Brown and the Bar-Kays. Okay, all of that information.
Kept that information.
Yes.
Goodness.
Wow. And did you have total access to all of that?
But I think one other thing I should talk about, the Dick Clark aspect of it.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
So obviously Soul Train was somewhat inspired by, American Bandstand.
Right.
But in 1973, Dick Clark decided that he wanted to get a piece of the pie. So he started a show called Soul Unlimited.
Really?
Which competition.
They did 5 episodes. And it was basically Dick, trying to co-opt Soul Train.
Right.
And thanks to partly Jesse Jackson saying, we're going to get black people to boycott ABC, and partly Clarence going behind the scenes and doing some diplomacy, That show only did 5 episodes.
And then it disappeared.
Yes, but it could have been very damaging because Dick Clark and American Bandstand dominated music TV, and at that point, '73, Soul Train was just getting really big. Got to remember, '71 when they went national, they weren't everywhere. They were only in selected markets. It took them a couple of years to get it national.
Now, you dedicate your book to, quote, all who have danced on the Soul Train line anywhere in the world. The Soul Train line is iconic, but what else made this show a cultural phenomenon?
Well, I think, look at it this way. 1971. It's Black Power, right? It's riots are still going on. Literally, there's a riot going on, as Sly would say. So the image of black people in media was they're causing a problem, they're agitating. That's what was on the news. Every now and then you would see the Temptations, the Four Tops on Ed Sullivan and one of those shows, but there was never anything like Soul Train. Soul Train's host was black, the music was black, the dance was black, and the commercials were black.
Yes, Afro Sheen.
Right, so you had a whole experience.
It was all about Afro Sheen.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, there's a famous Frederick Douglass Afro. Have you seen that one?
No.
There's a Frederick Douglass. You can find it online. Frederick Douglass, chastising his brother because his natural wasn't together.
Okay.
And he needed to get his squirt on.
Get his squirt on.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, you mentioned Don Cornelius earlier. We know he's the host, but he was also the brainchild producer behind the project. And in your book, you say that he was inspired by the civil rights movement. He saw a space for black joy on television.
Yeah, I think one of the things when we talked about the period again, the black celebration. I think Soul Train is joy. When I watched it on TV, we had a little color Trinitron first color TV about that big, and the colors. Soul Train was dynamic. It was, I think, important thing to remember is California soul, right? So there were dancers who went from Philadelphia, Chicago, all over the country. But LA was sunshine, it was bright. The women were beautiful, the men were tall, everyone had great afros. So there was a dynamic, there was a sexiness to that show that was very unique. No one had ever seen that on TV.
And you mentioned that. It was, for many white Americans, it's the first time they'd ever seen black people in that way, jovial, happy, carefree.
Yes.
How instrumental was Soul Train in helping shape mainstream America's perception of black people?
I put it this way. We had this political civil rights movement, which had started in the 50s, all through the 60s to 70s. When you go to the 70s, you have what I call cultural civil rights. Soul Train, Essence magazine starts in 1971. Black Enterprise magazine starts in 1971. Right On magazine, which you saw, you had your Jackson 5, your sitcom stars, and your Soul Train dancers. So there was a sense of black people as a cultural force becoming embraced. Another thing I should, on the same point, is that black advertising agencies benefited from Soul Train. Burrell Advertising out of Chicago, Uniworld out of New York. Suddenly we can say there's a black consumer market, we can make commercials for them, they deserve to be catered to and promoted for. So Soul
there
Train,
were ancillary businesses that were built around Soul Train.
that definitely benefited from his presence.
And it helped a lot of performers, too, because everyone from Aretha Franklin, Janet Jackson performed on the show. How important was this show to black entertainers?
Well, from 71, I mean, we're talking about, I mean, I can put it this way. We always think of Soul Train in the 70s context, but Destiny's Child's first national TV appearance was on Soul Train.
Was that right?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Erykah Badu's first national TV on Soul Train. So all the way into the 90s, Soul Train was still the main place, because BET didn't really get national till late 80s. So Soul Train was still very, very important, even past the golden era of Soul Train. There weren't that many vehicles for black people to perform and get that kind of exposure.
Talk about the global impact this show had.
Well, I mean, I'll give you a good example. Tyrone Proctor, who's one of the godfathers of whacking, okay? Last year, he went to Argentina and taught. He taught in Russia. In a month or two, he's going to Hong Kong, mainland China, and Korea to teach whacking. Whacking, a dance that comes out of gay black clubs in the 1970s. He's still teaching these dances.
Wow.
A lot of the other Soul Train dancers are around the globe teaching the dances from that show. Popping, locking, whacking, all of these dances, the bump.
The bump, yeah.
I mean, these
The
things.
robot.
Of course, the robot.
Gotta do the robot.
Yeah.
So these dances that started on Soul Train and on a black show, and are global dances that are taught to this day, and often by the original dancers, which is really dynamic.
In many ways, it was one of our leading cultural exports, wouldn't you argue? People always talk about rock and roll, but really, Soul Train was one of our cultural exports as well.
I think something interesting is that, the Japanese, fanatics for Soul Train.
Oh, really?
Fanatics. Really? They were collecting, all these authors, I mean, Questlove talks about it, a few of the acts talk about China, even in the 70s, 80s, they had all the shows collected. So this was not more than just a black show for black people. It came from that core experience, but like all great black culture, once you see it, it travels, and people want a piece of it.
It was a ritual for us and our family. I know many fans would gather around after your chores were done, of course.
Right.
Saturday.
You gather around Saturday morning and you watch you try to practice all the dances that they were doing, so you can take them to school on Monday and show everybody. So, how important was it to the black community that we had this outlet?
Well, look at dance. I mean, before that, I remember when I was a kid, it was like you came down to visit our relatives in Virginia. Tell us about the dances in New York. What's going on there? Soul Train immediately, boom. Let's do the bump. The bump, boom. That afternoon in the schoolyard, people are practicing their bump.
Yeah.
That night at the house party, they're trying to get their bump on. And it was that direct connection. It went from, our culture went national that quick. And it had never been anything that provided that kind of outlet. Even, we talk about Michael Jackson and moonwalking. They were doing backsliding on Soul Train before Michael. Michael learned from the dancers. Almost all those acts went on the show. If you watch James Brown was the Meet of Joe Freeman. If you watch New Edition was Lou Ski Carr.
Okay, yeah.
You see these there, and you see them coming on stage with the acts because the acts knew who the dancers were and were emulating their energy.
What other fun things did you discover while researching this book?
Like, what's the fun? Oh, I'll give you a good one. Marvin Gaye met his second wife on Soul Train.
Really?
Jan Gaye. He met her. She was a dancer on Soul Train. In fact, the I Want You album, if you listen to the lyrics of I Want You after the dance, that's what he's talking about.
Wow.
So there was a lot of hookups on Soul Train.
A wealth of knowledge. What else?
Well, like you said, the men were tall and the women were beautiful.
Exactly.
So that makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
There are people who got married on the show.
There were Soul Train weddings, Soul Train babies.
Yeah, Soul Train babies, definitely Soul Train babies. Rosie Perez. Rosie Perez,
Yes.
people forget that Rosie was on that show in the 80s and she was killing it. And she brought a whole East Coast kind of dancing that it caused a little friction with some of the other dancers.
She told an interesting story on Wendy the other day about how she got into a fight with Don Cornelius and threw a piece of chicken at him.
Yes. No. Because, the dancers had mountains. If you ever went to the Soul Train set, there were mountains of fried chicken at KFC.
Wow.
Mountains, because that's what they ate all weekend.
I'm not going to say anything about that stereotype. Okay, so moving on. You're a writer, you're a filmmaker, novelist, critic. What are the next 20 things you're doing? Because I know you have your hands in at least 20 things right now.
Well, the next big project actually involves dance, but of a very different kind. I'm working on a documentary with a woman, Misty Copeland, the black ballerina.
Oh, yes.
It's called A Ballerina's Tale. I've been working on it for a couple of years, and we're in the home stretch, hopefully getting it in festivals this fall.
That's happening.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
but I've been following Misty since she did the Firebird at the Met, which was a big breakthrough. She's one of the first really super prominent black ballerinas at a white company. So it's been her journey as a ballerina, as well as a look at the history of blacks in ballet.
Wow.
Right.
Definitely keep
Well,
an eye
good
out
luck
for
with that,
one.
and you have to come back when that's
Yes.
done, okay?
Oh, I can't wait to finish that.
A deal?
Yes,
Deal?
please.
You promise? All right.
All right,
Thank you,
so
Nelson.
much. And you're watching Arise Entertainment 360.